Unit 2, Module 2B. This is Part 2 of the module. If you haven't watched Part A, please go back and watch that first. Sometimes the game that you're working on doesn't lend itself to the core fantasy technique for coming up with a level concept. This is especially true when you're making a highly original world. In cases like that, you want to create a fantasy, not simply copy one. When you're creating an original setting, your first step should be to get clear about your level themes. Second, don't spend too much time struggling to come up with something that nobody ever thought of. Instead, take a setting that you're familiar with and give it an exciting twist. A great way to do that is to choose an interesting location and put it in some sort of imminent danger. For example, a ski resort buried by an avalanche, or a dystopian future city underwater, or maybe a coastal city flooded by unusually high waters that are full of some kind of dangerous marine life, perhaps deposited by some kind of tornado. If any of these settings seem familiar, like maybe you've seen them in games or movies, good. That means that the people who created them were paying attention to the fundamentals of good level design. I can hear the squeals of protest now. What? Why you sell yourself short? This is your chance to dream. You can make anything you can imagine. My advice here is based purely on experience. The more time you spend trying to explain your unique vision for a level, the less time you have to actually create it. And since game development is mostly a collaborative art form, chances are that if you want to make something truly unique, you're going to have to spend a great deal of time explaining it. In my humble opinion, it's better to take something familiar and give it a twist. This gives anyone working on the level, and indeed anyone playing it, an easy handle on how to think about the space, how to build it, and how to play it. Once you've made a few games together with a team, and you've built a reliable communication dynamic, feel free to make stuff that is just as outrageous as you please. But until then, let me show you how to make something original out of familiar elements. I call this technique wish fulfillment. It's one of the strongest techniques that you can use for creating memorable level content. Wish fulfillment relies on building an intuitive understanding of what a player would want from a particular experience and then giving it to them, whether they know that they want it or not. Let's start by taking a fairly commonplace setting like an airport. An airport could make a good setting for a level. It's a large space, it's filled with interesting shapes, and it seems to imply the promise of technology and travel. But if a player just ran through the common spaces of an airport level, then all they would find is things that are familiar to them. After all, airport terminals have a lot in common with really big malls. There are shops, places to eat and sit, areas for foot traffic, etc. So to make an airport level truly offer wish fulfillment to the player, we've got to think about the things that make the space more interesting or exciting to the imagination. As always, we start by creating our list of memorable moments. In the wish fulfillment technique, memorable moments can come from a variety of places: the dramatic context for the level, or narrative elements from the story, etc. But one of the best ways to start the list is to pull examples of reference pictures of the play space itself and also of the twist factor. Then we go over the images and start deconstructing them to tease out wish fulfillment elements. When I say deconstructing, I mean examining all of the reference pictures closely and trying to imagine how those elements could contribute to our list of memorable moments. Here's a very standard setting in an airport, but one thing strikes me about this picture. I have always wondered where the luggage conveyors in the airport actually go. That leads me to the idea that it might be interesting to let the player travel along the conveyor belt and see what's back there. Based on this reference picture, it looks like it might be fun to let them explore a baggage handling area. There are interesting machines back there for handling luggage and moving big, heavy stuff. The area where the bags come out of the terminal might also be interesting to explore. That transition is especially useful because another place that I'd really like to go is out on the runways among the planes. That's an area that most airport visitors aren't allowed to go, and it would make the experience of our airport level even more fun. Running around airplanes on the tarmac would be awesome. They are interesting shapes, and seeing them from the ground level makes for a refreshing change of perspective. These are both examples of wish fulfillment in action. The tarmac might be doubly interesting because it looks like there are lots of other cool machines and vehicles around the planes on the runways. Finally, it would be interesting to enter an airplane through the baggage compartment. That's another area that air travelers don't normally see. When I've traveled by air, I've heard the baggage handlers loading and unloading that space, but I have no idea what it looks like or what's actually down there. Then we could exit the level by flying out on a plane that we snuck aboard. That would be a pretty satisfying ending. It's another example of wish fulfillment. After all, the level is set in an airport. We can find a perfect example of this exact type of wish fulfillment in the hit co-op shooter Left 4 Dead. One of their levels, called Dead Air, offers a scenario that is almost identical to the airport level that I was just describing. In Dead Air, players travel through a ruined airport. The course of the level carries them through the terminal, down into the baggage area, and eventually out onto the tarmac, where they escape after refueling an airplane while holding off waves of attacking enemies. It's a level example of wish fulfillment at its best. A pirate walks into a bar and the bartender says, "Hey Mac, I haven't seen you in a while. What happened? You look terrible." "What do you mean?" the pirate replies. "I'm fine." The bartender says, "But what about that wooden leg? You didn't have that before." "Well," says the pirate, "we were in a battle at sea, and a cannonball hit me leg. But the sergeant fixed me up with this peg, and I'm fine, really." "Okay," says the bartender, "but what about that hook? Last time I saw you, you had 2 hands." "Well," says the pirate, "I was in a sword fight, and me hand was cut off. But the surgeon fixed me up with this hook, and I feel great, really." "Yeah," says the bartender. "Well, what about that eye patch? Last time you were in here, you had both eyes." "Well," says the pirate, "one day we were at sea, and some birds were flying over the ship. I looked up, and one of them pooped right in me eye." "What?" replied the bartender. "What happened? You can't have lost an eye just from some bird poop." "Well, no," says the pirate. "You see, I really wasn't used to the hook yet." Hardy har, hardy har! Let's talk through an example of wish fulfillment together, just so you're clear on the process. We're going to pick one of the examples from our previous list. For this example, I'm going to pick a hydroelectric dam under attack by enemy aircraft. My first step is to pull reference on the setting and the twist. Then I'll deconstruct the space and make a list of the things that I'd really like to see or do in a setting like this. I'm going to start by asking myself, what's cool about dams? What would I want to do or see if I was there? A little research on the web shows me that dams can be enormous. I'd want to see the dizzying heights of walking out along the dam itself. The interiors are interesting too. I'd want to get in and around the powerful machines that are used to generate electricity. The idea of tremendous water pressure ready to release is exciting and fun. I think I'd like to go in water or be around some kind of flooding. Next, let's think about the twist on our starting space and pull some visual reference for that. What would be interesting about a space that is being bombed? One thing that comes to mind is that I'd like to see familiar things in a ruined or broken state, like these garages. I'd like to travel over or through a space that has been heavily damaged, so that traversing it is different than normal, or maybe I'm seeing it in an interesting way. I think I'd like some explosions to go off, so that they change the state of my environment. Maybe they could open up new paths, put me in danger, or maybe even eliminate my enemies accidentally or deliberately. The next step in the wish fulfillment process is to make a list of memorable moments that we want the player to experience. Remember, these are the most dramatic bits of the level, elements that we want to stick in the player's head, and they will form the basis of our signature encounters. Here's a list of the moments that really seem to suggest themselves from the photo reference that I pulled. For example, the combination of images on this slide suggest a potential starting point for the level. Maybe we could be standing on the dam during the initial attack, right on the wall of the dam itself. It would be thrilling for a player to see that happen right as the level begins. I like the idea of walking along the heights of the dam, especially if we combine that with some kind of damage to make the traversal more interesting. Collapsed rubble seems to fit our concept very well, so I try to use plenty of that, especially if it makes moving through the level more visually interesting or makes the traversal more fun. The interior of the dam should definitely feature some of the cool machines that we talked about. There are a lot of interesting reference pictures to draw from. Since it's an emergency, some sections of the level could definitely feature swirling floodwaters. I really like the idea of temporary barricades barely restraining the rising floodwaters. And finally, it would be neat if the player was forced to exit the level in the floodwaters themselves. Diving into a car for safety and being swept away in a rush of water feels like it could be a great ending to the action. As you're creating your list of memorable moments, remember to review any decisions that you've made about level themes. Where your level designs fall on the spectrum will potentially have a huge impact on the encounters that you include in your level. A place or mood-themed version of the Attack That Dam level would be constructed very differently to one that was built around gameplay conventions. As we've discussed, the action in game levels is often framed to create dramatic context for the player's actions. You've got to reach the experimental reactor before it explodes and destroys Las Vegas, Nevada. Or, "We've got to find spare parts to repair the escape pod. It's our only chance to escape the Mad Cow Planet." Is there a story that you're trying to tell in your game? How does this level fit into that overall story? Are there specific goals or tasks that you're asking the player to accomplish? And are there steps that they might need to take before they can finish their main goal? All of those elements naturally lend themselves to be memorable moments as part of your level concept. And of course, they could form the basis of great encounters in your levels. Another method for coming up with your level concept is to put intense focus on its underlying intentions. Doubling down simply means taking the initial idea for your level and throwing out any ideas for encounters that don't match the main concept. Often doubling down on intention means focusing on a single game mechanic and featuring it for every single encounter in a level. In some ways, doubling down is both the simplest way to come up with a level concept and the most difficult. Simplest because anything that doesn't match the basic idea can immediately be subtracted. But it's tough because focusing on only one concept requires a great deal of creativity and discipline. For example, if the level was meant to be about the player swimming, then doubling down on a swimming concept would mean building encounters entirely around swimming activities. Going underwater, holding your breath or managing a limited air supply, swimming for depth or for speed, swimming against currents or swimming in the dark, etc. A real double-down approach would be to come up with an entire level's worth of encounters where the player never leaves the water. The Mario 64 level Jolly Roger Bay is a good example of doubling down on intention. Instead of simply including some swimming, but then also adding in lots of action on the beaches, almost every objective in the level is related to the player successfully navigating underwater. The points of interest were elements that made sense in an underwater-themed space. A sunken shipwreck, a giant whirlpool, a humongous swimming eel. As I said, doubling down on your intentions can be difficult to do because you have to stretch yourself creatively with a limited palette of options. The key to doubling down on intention is to approach building your list of memorable moments around the central concept and usually just a single mechanic of the game, and be ruthless. If you come up with an idea that doesn't fall into the main theme, discard it and force yourself to think harder. The technique can lead to some truly timeless designs. As we've seen in some of the previous modules, structural themes can also make very strong level concepts. When I was working on the original Halo, a momentary flash of structural inspiration led to the design of one of the multiplayer maps. The basic concept that popped into my head was, could I make a multiplayer level that you could only travel through in one direction? The answer turned into the Halo map named Wizard. Wizard featured a series of platforms set in a ring around a room. The platforms had ramps leading up only one side and a sheer drop on the other. There was a central column in the room at the same height as the encircling platforms. The structure of the space meant that a player could run up the ramps to reach the action plane of the level and then proceed on that mid-plane by jumping from the platforms to the central column and back. But if you ever missed a jump, you'd fall back to the floor level and you'd have to work your way back over to the ramps and into the action plane again. The structural theme created a dizzying circular flow pattern. The players spent all of the test games whizzing around in a circle, which immediately made me think of the name Wizard. Wizard, Blood Gulch, and Sidewinder are the 3 examples listed here, but most of the original Halo multi-maps were based on simple structural concepts, and many of those designs have stood the test of time remarkably well. In modules A and B, we learned about level concept and how it informs the design and the content of the spaces that we build. And we learned a number of techniques for helping to generate our initial level concept, including core fantasy, wish fulfillment, doubling down on intention, or using a structural concept. The step-by-step processes for these techniques are included in Unit 3. Phew, okay. That was a lot to get through. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. See you in Module 3.